I'm Sharon Barnes Waters.
Good afternoon. I'm Larry Mullins.
And welcome to this very special program. It's a town hall program on immigration called Immigration 101.
No politics, just the facts. Over the last few years, and certainly within the last couple of months, no issue has been more polarizing, divisive than that of the national immigration policy in this country. Sharon?
And yes, Larry, we have seen story after story, 1010 Wins and other media outlets, of immigrants that have been here for decades trying to make a better life for themselves and their family. And now some are hiding in the shadows, really afraid of instant deportation.
As a matter of fact, we talked about the guy from Brooklyn that we did a story on 1010 Wins who delivered a pizza to a military installation and ended up getting captured, if you will, by ICE. And they held him for like a month. And this was, mind you, around the 4th of July holidays, until a federal judge stepped in just a couple of weeks ago and said, no, let this guy go. He has paid his taxes. He's paid his dues. He's taking care of his family. He is not a threat to this country. And with that, the judge ordered him released. And now, all of a sudden, the judge is telling them, let him stay released until he can continue to exhaust all of his options so that he can become a permanent resident here in this country.
And so that's why we have brought this panel of immigration experts, as it was, to help you get through the maze of your immigration situations. They're going to be answering questions, and, you can ask those questions for yourself or a friend or your family, wink, wink. Just trying to sort through this jigsaw called immigration, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. And of course, some people have boldly come to ask the very same questions that you have out there, and that is, what do I have to do to stay in this country? And so with that, we have prepared for the next hour for you, Immigration 101, no politics, or at least we're going to try to keep politics out of this thing. No politics, just the facts. With that, let's introduce our panel.
And so on my left, I have the pleasure of having Commissioner Bita Mustafi from the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. She's right here. And we also have Jonathan Jimenez, who is in the DACA program. Thank you both for coming.
All right. And to my right is Attorney Harlan York of Harlan York and Associates. And yes, I do want a fee for that plug. You're a lawyer. Figure it out. He's a former immigration chair of the New York and New Jersey bar, as a matter of fact. You've been busy.
Oh, yeah.
Quite busy. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
An attorney with a loss for words, right? Okay.
No, we learn to be economical with our language because judges don't have a lot of time to hear us speak.
Nice comeback. Nice comeback. Not to be outdone, Elsa Ayub. Am I pronouncing that properly?
Yes.
The law offices of Elsa Ayub, specializing in employment-based immigration matters. Also, you were chosen as a rising star 3 years in running for your work here with immigrants.
Yes, I try my best.
Well, look at you. We do have an all-star panel here. With that, I want to point out the fact that we invited a number of people, immigrants in the community, undocumented immigrants, to come into our studios today. And Christian, if you want to show a quick shot of the size of the audience there, it's not very large, folks. We want to point out the reason for that, and you've probably figured it out yourself. There are a lot of people who are very afraid right now to come out of the shadows, even to come to our security desk here in our building, okay, for fear that ICE or some other agency would be there, to take them away. As we mentioned, the guy who delivered the pizza. There was a guy that I met a couple of weeks ago who was afraid to even go and apply for a library card. So that is the type of things that, people are faced with right now who've been here for years. Many of them brought here by their families as 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. Now, all of a sudden, they're adults, and they're afraid to come out of the shadows because all of a sudden, so many things are going on. Deportations we're hearing about, and so on and so forth. So with that said, I want that to set the tone. And
we're going to be starting. Let's start Immigration 101. I'm going to start with the commissioner because there are many policies in place. Some people reference New York as a sanctuary city. Some people don't like the phrase. What is the city's policy on those who are trying to stay in the country?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the forum and opportunity. I think I'll start by saying New York City is quintessentially the ultimate city of immigrants. Nearly 40% of our population is foreign-born. When you add in the children of immigrants like myself, that takes you to 60%. So when we talk about serving immigrant communities, we are fundamentally talking about serving New Yorkers. When we're talking about creating policies that are inclusive for all, we're talking about creating policies that make sense for all immigrants. And some of the ones that the city has in place are really remarkable, but really the bottom line to all of them is regardless of who you are, where you came from, what your immigration status is, you should be able to access healthcare. You should be able to access education. You should feel confident interacting with law enforcement, reporting a crime, or testifying in a case. You should be able to get a city ID card, like the municipal ID card, and so on and so forth. And so there are many, many policies that the city has in place to make sure that no one is left behind, that nobody who needs food or shelter can't access it, and that includes all immigrants regardless
So that's
of their
different
status.
from other states. When we say New York is a city of immigrants and you can access certain things, other states are different. So what makes New York so different when we use that term that some people don't want to use? It's not a legal term, sanctuary cities, but if you're an immigrant that is looking at deportation, what do you do? What's in place in the city that you can say, I can go here?
Sure. So every municipality has developed its own local policies, right? Cities don't control federal immigration systems, but cities ultimately are where immigrant communities live. So when we think about advancing the public safety and health of all of our city's residents, we must take into consideration folks who are here, even if they're undocumented. And so I think that's what makes some cities take policies like, we won't ask you your immigration status when you're seeking services. We will create programs that are universal for all, et cetera. I think on top of that, we should be incredibly proud of what Mayor de Blasio has done here in the city and our city council, which is putting forward a tremendous amount of resources for immigration legal support.
Commissioner, I was going to ask, does it make a difference then that this is a sanctuary city? What does that do for us?
I think it absolutely makes a difference that you have an administration in office here that believes in serving all of our communities. And what that means fundamentally in terms of policies is we've differentiated our role as a city in serving New Yorkers from that of immigration enforcement.
Okay.
We have said that our police department is not an arm of immigration enforcement, that they will not be knocking door to door to support ICE's endeavor to detain somebody or to deport them. We have carved out with the city council a very narrow circumstance in which somebody who is a public safety risk or might be on a terrorist watch list, our local Department of Corrections or NYPD could be responsive to an ICE request. But by and large, fundamentally, our policies are clear. The mayor has been clear. We will not partake in immigration enforcement. That is not who we are. That is not in the best interest of us as a city.
Okay, and we promised that we wouldn't get into politics, and we won't, but obviously this is something that's come up for a time now, and that is the threat on part of the federal government to remove monies from so-called sanctuary cities. I'm sure that's something that we'll be dealing with. With that said, let's cut to the chase. Deportation. There are a lot of people out there right now, Harlan, who are going, I've been here for 100 years. What's happening? How can I stay here? What are you seeing of late?
It's a variety of problems that have emerged. We already saw a tripling of deportation, or what we've called since 1997 removal cases in the courts between the Bush and Obama administrations. We rose to about 500,000 under this administration. Under the Trump administration, we've seen it rise to 733,000 pending cases in the immigration courts nationally, and that's with only about 330 to 340 sitting immigration judges. So you're looking at a ratio of approximately 2,000 immigrants per judge. It doesn't quite work out that way. In some cities, it's a much higher population that has to be fighting before a select group of judges. And in any event, you're talking about people waiting 3 years for a trial who are in proceedings right now. My firm has clients who are being told in 2018, your final date to see a judge as of now will be 2021.
Yeah, but they're turning the screws right now to get them out. So what do you do and what do you tell those people?
So the other side of it, beyond the fact that the system is so clogged with cases, to answer your question in regards to the ones who have a sense of urgency, I think what we're talking about there are people who've already been ordered deported. And under previous administrations, if they had equity, all the things you guys were talking about in your introduction, family, business, kids that are older going to school here that were born here, and there's over 900,000, let's say anecdotally, of those people in the United States who have final orders that Immigration and Customs Enforcement deems a fugitive. Those folks may have, under previous administrations, qualified for stays of deportation, not in perpetuity, for anywhere from a half a dozen to more than a dozen years. And under this administration, with the so-called zero tolerance policy, they are facing paperwork that says report back to the ICE office with a plane ticket in a matter of months. Pack your things and go. And many of these people, as you guys pointed out in your preface, have been living here for a very long time. We could be talking about a couple of decades.
Oh, Harlan, I just want to ask you, because when I spoke to you before, you were saying there were certain places, we talked about the pizza guy. Are there places that you and Elsa would say to immigrants, avoid? Because you may go to the Army base 10 times, and the 11th time, unfortunately, is when you, because he had been there before. So are there places that you would say to undocumented immigrants, listen, you should really stay away from, think twice?
Long before this administration, I typically would tell people who came to see me in certain circumstances, such as those who are simply undocumented or perhaps a longtime permanent resident as a green card holder who may have a crime on his or her record, you probably want to stay away from what we might refer to as sensitive areas. In other words, airports are a place that you have a lot of law enforcement walking around for obviously important reasons to protect this country. But on the other hand, you could have a person who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, who has never broken any criminal law in their life, and might find themselves in a greater risk of being detained or questioned or all the above. Beyond the airport, I would say anywhere near a land border or a seaport, anywhere that's a port of entry into the United States. Also, certain federal and municipal government or court buildings are not a good place to go into if you're worried about having an encounter with somebody with a badge or a gun who might ask you where you're going and what you're doing there. And past that, I typically tell people, you know, you have to live your life. And if we're talking about rather typically undocumented people, I would simply say we're talking about a number that has been estimated to be perhaps 11 million people in the United States of America. Wow. And that's you know, a lot of folks. And they have to live their lives and they have to feed their families. So it's tough.
This is the thing, though, folks, and let's be absolutely clear. We're talking about folks who are undocumented for whatever reason. And in all fairness, many of those folks will tell you, yes, I'm here illegally, to use the word, but nonetheless, I've been here for years. I've been paying the taxes. I've been keeping my head straight. I haven't caused any problems. I'm not a threat to this country. What can be done to keep me here? I would imagine, Elsa, on your side of it, you represent a lot of, from the business aspect. As a business owner, and I know a guy who's been here for 20 years who has a business, is wondering, am I about to give all of this up to go to a place I've never been before?
Actually, for most of my clients, these things don't come up because they're not in proceedings. They're just regular people, foreigners who created a business, had a business abroad, created an affiliate subsidiary, started one here, or invested. But I actually have one client from Argentina who came here on a waiver and overstayed and created a construction company that over the years has become extremely successful. He has income in excess of $20 million a year, and he's undocumented. And one of the things, to go back to your earlier question, that he always asks me is, Elsa, when are we going to get this done? It's taking forever. He drives his car with a license from another state, and that could be a risk. If he gets pulled over, something that most of us do every day without even thinking about it.
Is that by design, a subterfuge, or he just happens to be?
No, it's because in certain states you can't. Yeah. New York is one of them. So I believe his license is from Maryland right now. So, and he lives in New Jersey.
Okay.
And so, no, but it's true. Most of us don't give it a second thought. We just get in the car and you drive wherever you have to go. But these are the things that some people have to deal with that are just, you know, a risk, could pose a risk for them, because if they get stopped, it is a red flag.
Right, and it is a red flag. And I'm going to ask the commissioner, what are those programs? Because sometimes immigrants think they have no rights to housing and to police protection and to all those other things. What programs do you have that immigrants can come and say, listen, I need help for this, I need housing, I need medical care, because some won't even go to the hospital because, again, they don't want to give their names. So what's in place for?
And what can they expect to receive?
For sure. So thank you for that. So first off, all city agencies have protocols and policies that prevent them from asking immigration status for basic services. So that includes the local law enforcement, NYPD, that includes our public hospital system, which is fantastic, health and hospitals. They will not ask you your immigration status regardless of why you're coming. That includes, if you call 311, you can say Action NYC, you get a free and safe immigration legal support from a not-profit provider that the city funds. And we also take deportation cases. We should, again, reflect New York City has the highest rate of representation of any place in the country. That's because of the local investment in immigration legal support. All of these things, and I will say fundamentally kind of going back to what you touched on, which is all these individuals who are undocumented and what does that mean for them in this moment. I think nobody should debate that in this moment in time, we have a broken immigration system. Right. And what we're seeing is the erosion of aspects of that system that have made sense or frankly been in place to support many people who have been in our city and our country for decades. Temporary protected status holders, people who have been here on average in our city for about 20 years, who are now being told, nope, you can't remain here, when we're not thinking about the additional consequences of that. Most of these people are labor employees. They work in our health sectors. They're caring for our elderly and are sick, and we're saying you shouldn't be here. They have U.S. citizen children, and we're saying you're going to be deported. This is fundamentally not good for us as a country, and so we must address the broken immigration system. Yeah. We must do so in a comprehensive and smart way that takes into consideration everything that we've talked about and that cares for, frankly, our humanity as a country and a city.
And as you just said, I have to go over to Jonathan, because Jonathan, you are in the DACA program. Can you tell us your story? You've been here since you were 5 years old.
First of all, happy birthday to Jonathan.
Yeah, it's coming up.
So he'll be 12.
Thank you. So I migrated here when I was 5. I came to New York. Obviously, I've been here all my life.
From what country?
From Ecuador. So I've just been going to school here, living my life as a New Yorker, as most of you would say. And, one of the things that impacted me as I was growing up is, knowing that I don't have a status. I knew from a younger age, because I've been involved with my community since I was around 10 or 11. I've been doing work with, community organizations, just improve, the living of youths, and also my community as a whole. And I've been part of this rising of activist life that since from a young age. Wow. So it's just been like a very, very impactful and very a big struggle in my life. When I started going to high school, I started understanding more how not having a status will affect me in the future. One of the things was going to college. College is a very expensive 4 years of your life. So it's one of the things that I just was holding me back a little bit. But after graduation, obviously, we had the Deferred Action for Childhood Irrelevance program happen, and I was able to have a work permit, and I was able to have some kind of relief of deportation. And after that, it was just easy for me to a little bit adapt.
It's a little easier. Were you still nervous? Are you still nervous? How are you and your family feeling about? Is it going to go? Is it not going to go? How do you live your life now, feeling that way?
Well, for me now, I'm very I'm a very carefree person sometimes. So I just I go about my life for what it is. I go to school, I work, and I do what I like, which is just playing, doing my hobbies, which is just training and doing other physical exercising that makes me happy. But besides that, I do think about what's going on now in our time, and it's fearful.
Do you remember Ecuador? Do you remember anything about that?
No.
You were 5. So what does that look like if
in reality, I would tell you, to be honest, all I remember is mountains. Mountains from Ecuador. That's it. I don't remember anything besides the mountains that I used to see when I used to travel from one place, from my city Quito to somewhere else. That's the only thing I remember. I really don't remember nothing else.
So let's keep it real. What happens if something should happen in Jonathan's carefree life and ICE or someone, Customs, comes along and plucks you out of here and ships you back to Ecuador? Where would you be? What do you think about?
Well, I would be in the city of Quito, not knowing where to go, in a sense where I don't know any of the locations there. I'm not very fond of what's in Quito, right? Obviously, I do have family there, but at the end of the day, all I know is New York.
So that's why you're an activist in this too. You were
Yes.
talking about your activism. So
Yes.
you're fully involved in, listen, this is what
Yes.
I am, this is what, we're going through. You're very active.
Can I pose a question to the commissioner and to our attorney friends here today? There is one term and one phrase that keeps coming up that speaks to something called public charge. And my gut understanding of it is if you are a public charge, that is call it what it is, a burden, on the state or on the country or whatever, your chances of becoming a naturalized citizen are nil. Am I on the right track with that? And what are your thoughts regarding becoming a public charge? Because I understand they look at that as a reason to say, yes, you stay or yes, you go.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So public charge is a regulatory part of the immigration system. It's considered when you're coming to the United States to become a green card holder or legal permanent resident, or when you're applying to become one while you're here. At this moment in time, and this has been the law for several decades, the consideration is very, very narrow, right? So it's somebody who might be in long-term kind of care facilities or so on and so forth, who then becomes a charge, if you will, on the state. And that's a consideration and a totality of factors on what might be the sort of needs of that individual if they do become a legal permanent resident. So I practiced immigration law for well over a decade. I mostly served low-income individuals from across the world, and I've never had a case denied for this reason.
Okay.
So very narrowly prescribed. What we know is that in this current climate, under this current administration, there's been some leaked drafts of a change to that rule, a change to the way that could be applied in the future.
Tell us about that.
And it is extremely expansive and very shocking.
Wow.
So it's not only looking at sort of what might me, as the person who is choosing to apply to become a green card holder, might eventually earn or not earn. It is looking at what my household has used in terms of public benefits. So if I have a U.S. citizen daughter and my daughter has accessed Medicaid or early learning programs or SNAP, assistance, which she is perfectly entitled to as a U.S. citizen, right? That could be used against me, and I could be disqualified in my path towards becoming a legal permanent resident. This is fundamentally an attack on poor people, an attack on immigrants. Immigrants across the board, everybody from Albert Einstein to, some of the success stories of the clients that you guys just talked about. People come into migration and have this journey for very different reasons and in very different circumstances. And it's not wrong for people to take advantage of benefits that they're eligible for to help them along their way, because we realize what that gives back to us as a country and as a nation.
But if it's being used against them, though.
Yeah, it's just a proposal at this time. This is not something, it leaked out, drafts of it leaked out, so it's not there yet. We don't know when or if it will actually be a policy.
We don't, but we do know that it's going through the sort of administrative procedures to roll it out, if you will. There's been a notice. We, as the City of New York, have had a meeting with the federal OMB office to talk about the financial impact on New York City, the negative financial impact, should we see what the draft leaked rule has in it realized here in New York. So we are operating as though this could happen any day, and we know that this will be hugely negative for us as a city and that we will see really, really shocking poverty results.
Elsa and Harlan, how are you seeing this? Is this, I guess I'm looking for advice now for someone with whom you come upon. I mean, do you say to those folks, hey, don't be a public charge, don't be a burden? I mean, your chances are,
I'll give you the mic in a second, yes. The benefit won't be...
What I want to do here, and I don't mean to interrupt you, we need to tell folks exactly what they need to avoid. And we've started down that road. This is something that's come up. I've heard a lot about public charge. And if that's something we need to tell them, don't walk in there saying, hey, I'm going to need help or I'm going to need this and that and the other. You take it from
the
there.
commissioner covered most of it. What I would add is you kind of give advice on a case-by-case basis
Okay.
according to each family's circumstance. Usually, typically, the way it goes for a family-based case is they go to a financial sponsor who's a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, who has their own income. I mean, I'm not going to get into the details, but it's that person's income that is used to support whoever's applying for the benefit. If it's not enough, you have other options that you can look at. Basically, what I try to do right now is not to be too creative and to keep it as simple as possible
Okay.
and to stick to what the adjudicating officer is used to seeing the most, so that I don't have to go rely on his discretion or his counting on him being in a bad mood today, maybe. Tax returns, W-2s, if possible. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to go to businesses and look at Schedule Ks and go into being more creative because you don't, the income is showing a loss because accountants like to do that, and you're stuck with it in your filing. So for me, as simple and as unreliant on the adjudicating officer's discretion as possible to try to get it done. And then,
Can I add really quickly to that on this exact question, what should people do right now? This has not changed. The law and policy has not changed. The fundamental first thing that people should know is that nothing has changed right now.
Okay.
Even the leaked draft itself is prospective. It's not retroactive.
Okay. Right.
So that's very, very important and key. If you have additional questions, please, please, please call 311, say Action NYC. Both our hotline and our legal service providers are prepared to answer questions that
Okay.
folks might have about what this could in the future look like and what they should do right now.
Okay. With that said, speaking of questions, we have a number of people who, again, sent in questions for this program, afraid to show up here in person, and we're going to share some of those questions with you in just a moment. But I want to tell you, there is a gentleman in the that is joining us today that we want to bring up on stage. If I can have him seated next to me, if I can have you two to just scooch down a minute. This is Cesar Adrian Vargas, and as he comes, and you can prepare maybe some of the questions that we've gotten, this man here, I can say is a wizard. You've done some amazing things with regard to immigrants' rights. You yourself are amazing in that he is sitting here as one of the first lawyers, and I think there are only 2 or 3 in the country right now who are practicing law as an undocumented immigrant. And the funny story, I read something, I think, where they told me, Cesar, that when you got the news from the state appellate court that you had been cleared to become a lawyer here and to practice law, at the time, you were in court at the time defending yourself, having been arrested for something. So did you ever at any point when you got that call saying, hey, you're in, and you're in there fighting for an arrest that you had, wonder to yourself, ooh, let's sign the papers quick before they change their minds?
Well, no, for me, I think, and thank you so much for having me, for really giving me an opportunity to connect, especially because right now in this climate, it's incredibly important to get the correct facts. And specifically to the point where you mentioned that at the moment that I got the news that I was, ready to be sworn in right away, I was arrested defending myself in Iowa because...
you're in Iowa?
I was in Iowa, and I was challenging, confronting presidential candidates like Donald Trump, Chris Christie, Rick Perry from Texas. And for me, it was the first time that the intersection between the advocacy work that I did to give a voice to the undocumented community and to give myself a voice and to protect my family, that was the first time that those two paths collided in terms of now I was out there challenging presidential candidates over their harsh and insulting rhetoric on immigration, but then I was on the other line fighting my own case to be admitted into the New York State Bar. And when I got arrested, that was the time that, for me, it was so close yet so far to know that I got the decision, but this court that eventually that I was able had to go through this process, delayed it for another 6
Cesar,
months.
What made you want to be a lawyer? Because when I think of a lawyer and when I think of an undocumented immigrant, it seems counterproductive. How do you go to court? How do you do things when you're not documented? How did that all work? How does that work?
Well, I think it really goes to the very fundamental inspiration that our parents give, and my mom has been an inspiration. And I think for me, the reason that I became a lawyer was something that my mom has always said: en la familia tenemos que tener un abogado y un doctor.
Okay.
In our family, we need to have a lawyer and a doctor. And for her, she meant that we always need to have someone to defend the family, someone to defend the community. And it's incredible that the commissioner brought her mom, and to really show that we continue fighting to live up not just to the American dream, but to our parents' American dream. And for me, my mom's American dream was not a fancy car or a big house, but that you have to continue to open the doors of opportunity for others. And that is what the American dream, and that's what my mom inspires me each
And
day.
you were 5 when she brought you here, correct?
I crossed the border when I was 5 years old after my father passed away.
From what country?
Mexico.
Okay.
And my mom, like any mother, took the decision either stay in Mexico not knowing what's going to happen, or risk everything to that one day perhaps when my children grow up, one of them could be an attorney. And I think this is really what we're talking about when we are discussing immigration. We're not just talking about the dreamers. We're not just talking about the college students or the lawyers or the people or the immigrant who speak English. We're talking about every immigrant, and because my mom is my hero. And I will never blame my mother for giving me a better life.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the message that we're trying to send to Washington, D.C. and across the country.
There was a bill that was on the table which never passed, my understanding, the Assembly, the House, and the Senate here in this state. So your fight isn't over. It's not over yet.
Absolutely. And, I think when we're talking about immigration, a lot of the focus has been centered on Latino immigrants, Mexican immigrants. But immigration affects the entire world. And specifically, we have here in New York City immigrants who have lost TPS, whether from Liberia, African immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, who are also subject to possible deportation. And I think, this is what we're talking about to ensure that we're giving a voice to every single immigrant, whether they're dreamers with DACA, whether those are African immigrants who just lost TPS, or other immigrants who are now subject to possible bans because of the Trump administration's policy to reject anyone because of faith. So for us, really, the fight is not over, both at the city level, both at the state level, at the federal level, to ensure that we are giving a voice for immigrant communities across the country.
Okay, let's do what we came here. Give me
and
some questions.
Now we have some questions here. I'm going to ask, this is going to be directed to Harlan. First question, approximately how much money should one expect to pay in application and legal fees while seeking citizenship?
So citizenship is frequently used in a layperson's terms as a sort of catch-all for being here lawfully, and I'll just distinguish very quickly. If you're applying for citizenship, the current fee is, I believe, $725, including the fingerprinting fee. But frequently people will interchange the use of the word citizen and lawful permanent resident, which is a green card holder. A green card application, typically through a family member, is $1,760, just to give you 2 examples. All right? Those are just the filing fees with the Immigration Service. I've been doing this for 22 years. When I started, there were people who were a generation before me who could tell me in 1972, when they started, it cost $15. Obviously, these things do reflect the economy, but it's not an inexpensive proposition for a family of 4.
Yeah.
I'll add to that in terms of citizenship. The city has an incredible New York citizenship program. It's free legal citizenship services at local libraries. So again, you can call 311 and say NY citizenship or just citizenship, and you can get connected to free legal services. Many people qualify for a fee waiver or a partial fee waiver.
Right.
And the teams on the ground will actually be able to sit with an individual and see if they qualify for something like that as well.
And I'm going to keep with you because the next question said, how do I know if I meet the qualifications for asylum?
So asylum law is very complicated, and it really is fundamentally based on somebody who fears persecution or has experienced persecution in their home country and won't be safe there. And so anybody who is in that situation or who doesn't know if it squarely fits into that definition really should speak with a immigration legal service provider. I can't say it enough. Call 311 and say Action NYC.
It's going to drum it into
You
your
can
head.
get that free consultation from a safe and qualified provider to tell you, yes, it looks like you might have an asylum case, and we can connect you with an experienced lawyer who knows these cases, or no, you might not qualify for that, but potentially something else.
Elsa, another question was, somebody was being sponsored here in to the United States to be a citizen, and their sponsor died.
Whoa.
What happens now?
Sponsored by a family member?
Yeah, by not a family member, someone else. Not a family
Right,
member,
right.
like they're probably a housekeeper or so.
Okay, so if it's an employment, because there's usually two major ways to come to this country, right? Either through work or through family. And when the sponsor, whether it's the less frequently for employment-based cases, it's usually a company, but and if it's the owner of the company who passes away, then you have management. You can usually find a way to continue the application. It's much more difficult to do that when it's a family-based case, because unfortunately, most of the time you have to stop, right?
I'll just add one point. There is a very strong policy in the United States for widows. Widow provisions are very, very profoundly geared towards protecting those. And even in 2009, there was an expansion of widow provisions. We're not going to get into a full legal analysis of some of these questions, but just be aware that if, God forbid, you do find yourself in that situation where you're in process of trying to get your status regulated or legalized in the U.S. through a spouse, and God forbid that spouse passes away, you should find out about whether or not you seek an alternative means to avail yourself of a green card, perhaps through a widow provision protection there.
Can I ask you something? To be quite frank, you know, you hear so many times, and I've heard from people going, well, if you got the money, you can do anything. Does money talk with regard to getting immigration status here, or does that go out the window, that myth?
Look, you know, at the end of the day, you're better off being undocumented and having money than being undocumented and not having money, but I would say that would speak to all people, because you can obviously keep a roof over your head and clothes on your back. But to your point, certainly in the majority of immigration cases, I'll see in more than 2 decades of practicing under 4 different presidential administrations, frequently people come in and they may not have their papers yet. Elsa spoke to this a little while ago about an Argentinian fellow who she consulted with. I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of folks who've come through my doors from all over the world to the United States, and they're business owners or they're folks who have a very good livelihood in a particular industry, and they have the spouse and children, and they earn quite a bit of money, and no one in their own community even knows they're undocumented. I'm not necessarily talking about the higher strata, but maybe even just so-called middle-class folks, and they'll say, I have money, can I just pay a certain amount of money? And this is something we've said for many years. This topic came up, I believe the commissioner touched on this earlier, the system being broken. Every presidential candidate, every president of the United States has, in their own way, talked about for more than 2 decades, certainly, how the system is broken. And it does make sense from an economic as well as social and just from a regular humane standpoint. If you have money, certainly you shouldn't get a special privilege, let's say, in our society. And we do have an area of law that allows people to come here lawfully if they invest money in the United States, but it's a pretty select group of folks.
I will just add to that, actually, which is to say that the immigration context is unique in this situation because there's no right to counsel. So it does
There
actually.
is no right to
There
counsel.
is no right to counsel. So it actually does make a difference if you have money in many situations to be able to pay for an attorney to represent you. That is why an administration that has cared about fairness and equity for all has believed in investing in immigration legal services. And we know, this is not us making it up, we know that people who have an attorney, a good attorney, are far more likely to win their case in the immigration system than those who don't. And so it does matter.
Well, can I ask you then? That just leads me to the separation of families. Do those parents who was taken away from their children, they need counsel? So they have to have money. May not have money, for legal counseling. So what happens?
So they're out of luck, sounds like.
Yeah, so
I mean,
thanks for the question.
They've been ordered to
Yeah.
reunite the children with their parents, but the parents still need some kind of legal counseling.
This has been such a critical challenge in this crisis, one where we've seen 2.5-year-olds taken away from their parents at the border, and an attempt of saying to people generally, don't come to our country. This is the most inhumane action a government can take against anybody, period. And what my office learned, kind of working with some of the parents along the border whose children were brought here to New York City, and
you didn't know they were here.
yeah,
Right. Okay.
was, they didn't. Most of them didn't have. The parents didn't have attorneys. We were scrambling and contacting local providers along the border who could go and represent the parents, and then create a line of strategy and communication with the kids' attorneys who are here in New York City. So yes, this is a huge problem. It is one in which somebody who may in fact be eligible for asylum, an extremely complicated area of immigration law, but when we were seeing the vast majority of these people were coming here fleeing violence, really should have an attorney that can guide them through and talk them through what their options are, so they know. And
call
that
for
was
real
not
one?
available.
Yeah,
Call
and
for
I wanted to add quickly in terms of the question about counsel and attorney. It's also being very vigilant of when it's looking for counsel, because sometimes people do get desperate and saying, I need to get a private attorney. And obviously not everyone has access to amazing attorneys who are here, but sometimes people are just defrauded because they think they're talking to an attorney, and
They're not.
either
Right.
they're defrauded because right now there's a
They
scam
take their
going
money, yeah.
called the 10-year scam. Some people
It's called a 10-year scam.
10-year scam pretty much says that if people are told that if you've been here for 10 years and your son is sick, you can get a green card. But it's not true, right?
Okay. Let's make sure
the
they know that
reality
is
is
not
that
true.
people are placed into a deportation proceeding because they have applied for asylum. Some people don't even know that they're applying for a certain application, and then all of a sudden they get notice to appear, pretty much the document saying that you're going to start a process of being deported. People don't know on that. So I think to the concept of that, it's so important to really connect with community organizations that Jonathan mentioned, with the city, to get connected with Action NYC, and then eventually, if the case is, we have incredible attorneys that the private public providers, like for example the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project that represents immigrants in deportation in Barrack Street. Those are free of charge. Also, Action NYC, they work with different community organizations, and they're free, and they're incredible attorneys. And of course, if there's a much more complicated case, we can definitely work with private attorneys that eventually are referred. So for me, the first thing that I tell the community is that get connected with the community organization. Get connected with advocates that can point you in the right direction to proper counsel.
And I'll just go back to where you started on that to really punctuate this point. The pizza delivery gentleman, Pablo, who you mentioned, he was represented by city-funded nonprofit providers.
Okay.
Wow.
And he is free. And
Okay.
so I think really that speaks both to the kind of advocacy community that's around New York City that supported him, but also to that investment in providers who are doing excellent work to represent people across the city.
Okay, let's do this. Let's get a couple more questions, and then let's go down the line. And I would like to get the best grassroots tip that you can give to our viewing audience as to how to navigate this, so that we don't, repeat each other or whatever, or step on each other's toes. So we can go down, and you too as well, Jonathan. I mean, as a young man. But I want to get a couple more questions in first.
Okay, Commissioner, if a family member has been deported but was only here illegally for 4 months, can they re-enter the country legally, and what does the process consist of? A family member had been deported but was only here illegally for 4 months, so they only overstayed their time by 4 months. You still overstayed your time. What's the
I would
process?
simply say that every case is so unique and individual that without knowing anything else about that case, it's so difficult to advise. We've got kind of lawyers on the bench. I don't know if you want to jump in.
Sure. I mean, the most ordinary answer I give to people, we get that request a lot via email and via phone. Somebody just got deported recently. How do we get them back? My family member, my loved one. More often than not, if they meet certain criteria, the general answer I'll give folks is the most common means by which people can re-enter after deportation is to seek a waiver, and they usually need a qualifying relative, such as a citizen spouse or parent, who can claim that that person's absence in their life causes them what the law deems extreme hardship.
Another question. I'll give it to you,
Okay.
Harlan. Under the current legislation, can I renew my period of deferred action and employment under DACA?
Yes, DACA was rescinded by the Trump administration. However, immediately after that happened last year, there were many challenges to this rescission, and 3 different federal courts in the United States of America have affirmed that DACA cannot be taken away. We're talking about over 250,000 folks, 80% from Mexico, about 10% from Central America, and the other 10% from everywhere from Ecuador to France to India to Korea. And the DACA community is absolutely entitled, and hundreds of thousands have actively renewed their DACA applications since the actions of these various federal courts. So DACA is alive and well for those who wish to renew. And in fact, I don't want to get into a whole sidebar on this, but even renewals are becoming a likelihood as a result of one of the federal courts, or not rather renewals, but rather brand new applications are perhaps opening. The doors have just been opened within the last week or so. I don't want to get into the whole jurisprudence, but there's been some new decisions that have been useful for the DACA community.
Let me ask,
Yeah.
did any of you see this coming?
In what
I mean,
regard?
this didn't just start yesterday. All of the things that we've been hearing with regard to deportations and people being stopped and that sort of thing. But getting to the point where we are right now in this climate, as you referenced, Commissioner, did any of you see this coming?
If
I
I
mean, it's
may-
like we're in a crisis right now.
Well, you know, I don't want to diminish how critical this time in our history is. I think it's important for us as advocates and people who are dealing with this on a daily basis in various roles to understand, just for a deep breath moment, so people's phobia is lowered a little bit. I remember 1996 when President Clinton signed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. That's a mouthful. We call it IRA. And all the immigration attorneys I knew then, who were old timers, and I was a young attorney starting out like you at that time, these older attorneys were saying in 6 months, no one's going to go to 26 Federal Plaza or 970 Broad Street. The federal buildings are going to be empty. Everyone was fearful. There were no smartphones. There was no social media. I think, not to diminish the critical nature of what is happening, because we are absolutely dealing with a crisis right now, and we can all speak to different areas of immigration law that are being impacted, almost like going into the ring and going, oh, I got another one coming. Now I got to get my hands up so I don't get hit here to help my clients. But the answer is, historically, we've seen other times in our immigration history where things like this have happened. I think smartphones and social media and the constant, just nonstop information that's coming out at people amplifies things. So I say that to my clients and my potential clients to kind of lower their anxiety about what's going on, to remind them we've survived IRA, and we've kept fighting. We've survived changes in the immigration law that to some extent were necessary after 9/11, and we'll survive this as well. We have to keep fighting.
And there's another legal question, Elsa, if you can answer this. And this has to do with the travel ban. So this person says, I am legally here on a visa, but originally from a country I believe is on the travel ban list. Will it be harder for me to get an extension because of this?
It should not. If you look at the travel ban itself and the regulations of the ban, people who are holders of a visa and people who are present in the United States are not affected, are considered people either exempt from those who are affected from the ban. But there's a difference, in my opinion, maybe because originally I'm Lebanese and I can relate to that. I come from a region and a country that could have very well potentially have been one of the countries on the list.
On that list.
There's always the letter of the law and the letter of the regulation, and then what happens in real life and in practice and how to advise somebody. Now, you have to take a chance, and you know, the clear answer to that question is this person should be fine and should have no issues. But then, you know, as much as we want to stay away from politics, unfortunately, they're very intertwined, and there are policies now. So I don't know if that person in 2 years or 6 months had to go back to her home country to renew the visa, if she would be all right.
Allowed to
because
re-enter the country.
at the end of the
nonetheless.
day, you know, a visa is discretionary.
Yeah.
And, you know, nobody has a right to it. You can qualify all you want
But it's not an automatic.
if the officer does not want to give it to you, especially abroad, there's nothing much you can do. So I would
It's a gray
say
area.
I would say try to avoid traveling abroad and try to do what you need to do from within the
From the United
US
States.
through a change or adjustment, or because here it's a little bit less discretionary, I
Okay.
would say.
Let's let that be the springboard. If you'll pass that to Harlan, what is your best grassroots tip that you can give to our viewing and listening audience right now?
So many different areas have come up in the last 45 minutes, Larry. The first thing I tell all immigrants who come to our practice in our office is be careful. Because, as has been pointed out by several of the panelists, it's very easy for immigrants to be exploited and defrauded and perhaps find themselves at greater risk of deportation in addition to losing their funding, their hard-earned money. So the short answer, I would say, is you have to be very careful if you're an immigrant. I see people every single day who I tell, save your money, don't give it to somebody who promises you, like Cesar was talking about, the 10-year, we'll call it, means by which people think they're going to get legal status here, and instead they lose their money and frequently also find themselves fighting deportation.
How long should it take you to go through the process of becoming, or is it a case by case?
Exactly. It varies greatly depending on your circumstances, depending on the application that you're filing, depending on frequently where you're from.
But surely, Harlan, if you're going 10 years in a process and it hadn't happened yet, should one become suspect, though, at that point?
If somebody came into my office and said another attorney or another law firm has my file and they've been waiting 10 years and the firm still doesn't have an answer for them, I might advise that I'd like to see a copy of the paperwork just to let them know whether or not things are
on the up and up,
done right, legitimately or not. Sure.
But sometimes people don't start the process right as they come into this country. They work for a while and then they find a sponsorship. That's why some of them are in the shadows. So sometimes they're 5 years in, then they find a lawyer because they have finding money to do this and that.
People don't believe me, Sharon, but I have had people on a routine basis coming into my doors who have been here 30, 40 years.
I know some.
That's insane.
And
Yes.
people say, well, how come they didn't get legal? And there's a whole other hour we could spend as a panel talking about why that doesn't always work so easily. But the short answer is when people say, well, why don't they just do it the legal way? Those of us who do this as our life work understand that there's a whole host of reasons why. And yes, Larry, absolutely, they're trying. The system is geared with visa bulletins that show in certain categories a Filipino brother or sister is backed up 25 years, and so many other examples we can give you.
Cesar?
Yeah, I think, in this climate of anxiety and fear, I think we also need to remind ourselves that our stories are very powerful. This is what makes this country an amazing place as a city of immigrants, as a nation of immigrants. And, I think for me, like, the power of each story is the ability to tell the story and remind the nation of who we are. It's easy to get into those talking points of illegal is illegal, why didn't do it the right way? But when you tell your story, when I was able to tell my story, my neighbors, students, professors, they got shocked. Like, I didn't know you were undocumented. And I see the issue in a very different way. So for me, I tell them, get involved through your story. And I'm not talking about telling your story in a press conference, in front of 26 Federal Plaza in the immigration court. I'm tell your story to your friend, your coworker, your employer, and that allows that person to truly empower. For example, on Pizza Pablo, once he got detained, he could have been faceless and his story would have gone unnoticed. But the wife went to a reporter and told her story. And then the entire nation saw the injustice of that. And I think this really goes back, I guess, Elsa, just the last point about, it's definitely intertwined with politics. And for me, I say this, if you want to get involved, whether you're undocumented, documented citizen, is ability to have your loyalty to your community. To fight for justice, not for a political party. Because both parties are equally at fault for an immigration system that it targets our families, Democrats and Republicans. And I think the power lies in our community, the power lies in our vote, registered to vote, and telling our stories.
Can I just ask you one brief question before you go, Larry? What kind of law do you practice or looking to practice?
Well, right now, I'm definitely learning immigration law, and as we know, immigration law.
It's in your heart.
It's in my heart, it's in my blood, but it's also, in my soul. And for me, I think it really is making sure that we are opening the doors of opportunity for others, just as other people have opened the doors of opportunity for me.
I think you're a shining light. Just to have you up here. Can we switch down to Jonathan, and we'll let the commissioner have the last word because I want to ask a few more questions of her. You're a young man. You'll be, about 16 or so, a couple of days from now. No, actually, how old are you turning?
I am going to be 24.
24. And you've been going around. How long have you been in this country?
Since 5.
Since you were 5.
Yeah.
How have you managed to do that? I mean, you sit here and you say you walk around happy-go-lucky. And you mentioned that you look over your shoulder from time to time. But yet, It doesn't seem to bother you. What is your advice to somebody in your position who, quite frankly, isn't here today because they're afraid that, hey, I'm not going in front of a camera or on a microphone?
Well, for me, is that, like I said, I've been part of, like, community organizing and activist since I was 10, and it's just I've been growing up with the struggles and challenges that every single teenager, not only a teenager, like regular teenager who's a citizen, but also like an undocumented teenager goes through throughout their life, right? So for me, it's just get involved with your community, get involved with organizers who are willing to, like, be the person you will talk to when you have issues. One of the things that I've known for like the last couple of years is that you can also have self-care. Self-care is very important. Like, you have to always remind yourself that you matter, and you have to, like, also put energy into your love within yourself. And one of the things that I also like, doing the work of community organizing, doing the work of prepping for rallies or marches and stuff, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. I was doing a lot of that stuff during the Dream Act campaign that we had a couple of months back. And it's I was doing a lot of the logistical work for United We Dream, and I was putting on my energy to going forward and doing the last 3 months, which was like one of those most hectic and very impactful months for me. And one of the things I reminded myself is that I have to do what I love. And for me, what I love is, I like teaching. I like teaching Taekwondo. I teach Taekwondo for kids. And I also like training myself in other different martial arts. And that's my love. That's my passion. And that's what I do. That's my self-care.
And you're very involved in your community,
and
too.
I'm very involved in my community as well. So one of the things that I could say is that, if you're undocumented, get involved, but also find something that you love to do. Find something that you have a lot of passion for.
Yeah.
And then do it that as well. That's how you become happy.
I'm almost translating that as if to say, okay, I'm in America. I love being in America. I feel like I'm an American. I've been here for 100 years. Sounds like what you're telling me is act like it. Get involved in the community and do things. And that way, when something comes up, you've got a community, i.e. Pizza Pablo, or Pablo Pizza, whatever, the young man named over in Brooklyn, the pizza guy. He had a lot of backing from the community that are saying, hey, he belongs here. He's one of us. Had he not had that backing, we wouldn't be doing this story about him. We wouldn't have even mentioned his name probably because we would not have known. So you can imagine. So
yeah, of course. So one of the things that, like, just what Cesar said, we had to share your story. Like, your story is what identifies you. I've been sharing my story since I was 10, and like I'm still.
Because some people think that it's just them.
Yeah.
And so they know that there is a you, and they know that there is a Cesar, and they can take a little page from your book and say, listen, if they can do this, look what I can do in my present circumstances. So, Commissioner,
lay it out for us and give us some information on where we can call. You mentioned 311, maybe once or twice, that people can get more information.
Happy to. So I will give a lot of recommendations. One, it is a moment of anxiety for people generally, especially for immigrant communities. The First Lady of New York City has launched an incredible program called Thrive NYC for anybody who needs any mental health counseling or services or just needs to talk to somebody, and they can do so in their language. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days in the year. Just call 1-888-NYC-WELL. 1-888-NYC-WELL. I think that's important for all of us. I mentioned 311. You can get free and safe legal services, get that screening, ask your questions, make sure you've talked to a trusted provider. Just call 311 and say Action NYC. The city also has a municipal ID card. Sometimes people are fearful of having a passport with them because it says where they're from or it doesn't have a visa on it. This card, we don't ask you your immigration status when we issue it to you. It does not say where you're from on it. Nothing like that. You can carry it's accepted by local law enforcement. So get a free municipal ID card in the city. You can do so across the city at libraries and other enrollment locations.
Can I just interject, ask what the card, does that work outside of New York, or is just for New York?
It's a local ID card, so all local city agencies, local law enforcement, right? But again, for people who might be fearful interacting with folks, having something that says where they're from or has immigration paperwork in it, they can carry this instead. That's an option for them. And know that we will continue to fight as a city to protect immigrant communities. You mentioned kind of the threat to take funding away from cities who have policies like ours. We sued 2 weeks ago the Department of Justice, saying we will not change our local policies. Any attempt to take funding from a city based on sort of forcing our cooperation with immigration enforcement, we will fight against. And I will echo what Cesar has noted, and Jonathan and others, that voices are so important. The fabric of what makes our city amazing and brilliant is its diversity, is all of these stories, is what people are able to realize when they fight alongside each other to help each other. And we have for far too long let ourselves sit on the sidelines and not participated in our democracy. And so therefore we don't see a vibrant democracy. We know in our city 600,000 plus people are legal permanent residents and can apply to be citizens, but haven't. You can vote if you're a citizen. Apply today. Call 311 and say NY citizenship.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. This has been very informative. I want to thank our very eye-opening. I hope you've picked something and you've learned something. But I want to really say a very special thank to our panelists. Jonathan, you showed up. Yeah. Thank you so much. When others didn't want to do that, I really admire you.
And we understand.
We do understand if people who had said no, but you are in the DACA program. You showed up. You're advocating for your community. Thank you for showing up and being that example to others. Others can see and say, listen, I can do this. I can get involved and not be so fearful. And they can thrive like you and Cesar thriving. Commissioner, thank you for taking the time to explain so much to us today. As you have said, there's ways, there's programs, there's numbers to call for people who want information. Thank you for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule. Cesar, you make me smile. You're a lawyer. When I read your story, I was like, what? A lawyer who's undocumented? How did that happen? But you were persistent, and when people said no, you said, why not? Why not me? Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for being that advocate in the community, that face in the community that's fighting. Harlan, from the first day I spoke to you, I smiled because I knew that you were going to give great information. Thank you for being a part of the discussion and providing information. My dear Elsa, as you and I are immigrants, thank you for being that face, and thank you for all the hard work you do for the immigrant community, for the businesses, for the families. Thank you for being a voice and for being an immigration attorney that people can trust. That is very important. Harlan, you, Cesar, immigration attorneys that can be trusted. Mm-hmm. We thank you for your service. And Larry, we'll take it from here.
And that is the key. I can truly say, folks, just listening here today, there's a lot of information that was shared. There was a lot of information which probably has not been shared, and we don't profess to be able to answer everything within 1 hour, but we hope that what has been shared with you will get just one little flicker of hope, or just give you one little glimpse into what can be done to answer that question. What can I do to stay in this country, and in a country that I love and that I've been in for so long? I appreciate our guests for joining us as well. And folks, more than anything else, as the commissioner has mentioned, when you have questions, 311, and let it take you from there. With that said, I would like to thank my executive producer, Ms. Sharon Barnes-Waters, as well as the others, Mr. Ben Mevarak, Mr. Ivan Lee, of course, Imani is here as well, Siyong, and the rest of our cast and crew here at 1010 Wins and Intercom Radio for allowing us to put on this very important forum here today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll check you on the radio. I'm Larry Mullins. Good afternoon.